All right. Well, guys, welcome. Welcome to another talk hosted by the Weatherhead East Asian Institute. And today we're very happy to have Professor Campbell join us. Let me, for those who are not familiar with him, let me introduce him to you. So Campbell is the chair professor in the Division of Social Science in Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Before joining HKUST, he was a professor in the Department of Sociology at UCLA. Professor Campbell studies demography, stratification, and inequality in both sort of historical China and also in a sort of comparative perspective. He is one of the leaders of this renowned Lee Campbell group, which produces some of the most amazing and ambitious individual level data set for main historical data in China from sort of the Qing era to the Maoist era. They have, for example, databases of college students, during the Republican era, professionals, bureaucratic elites, and also village level, micro data sets from rural China between 1949 and the 60s. So his research has been published in numerous leading journals such as American Journal of Sociology, American Sociological Review, Demography, Population Studies, and so on and so forth. He was a Guggenheim Fellow in 2004 and also a Jiang Scholar at Central China Normal University from 2017 to 2020.
Yeah, and I still have an affiliate.
Yes, good. That's good. That's good. Keep that. So today he's going to talk to us about one of the data sets, amazing data sets he has, and that is the China government employee data set for the Qing era. And we're very more than eager to hear about it. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor to Campbell.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. And then I guess I should start the slideshow and then share, right? Oops. Hey, shouldn't I get the presenter view? Okay. Share. Okay. Okay. Okay, great.
Bring them back to speak.
Okay, great. So it's a real pleasure to be back here. As actually, when I think Junyan gave the invitation, I reminded him that I had been here maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. I think it was just right after we had started the project that I'm going to be talking about today. And I asked, like, wait a second, is this too soon? Like, what if everyone, remembers everything? And they said it was fine. And indeed, I think the material, the project that I introduced at that time has made a lot of progress in the last few years. So it'll hopefully be rewarding. And you'll, those of you who were here last time will find something new in what I'm going to be presenting. Okay. And so what I'm going to be presenting, just to sort of provide some context, is material from a couple of chapters in what's turning into a book project, where we're working on a book that'll be a sort of an empirical picture of late Qing officialdom based on microdata on the nearly complete universe of officials with formal appointments. And we have a variety of motives for doing this. One is that I think we're concerned that exam degree holders have received most, in some ways, nearly all of the attention when it comes to people's thinking about officials in the Qing, even though there were actually large categories of important categories of other kinds of officials, like holders of purchase degrees, bannermen, and then of course there's a whole separate military set of military officials as well. And so through a sort of you might say a big data approach, we want to kind of provide some context on what the exam degree holders were doing in relationship to these other groups. What we also want to do is provide some, related to this, is some ground truth for contemporary discussions of degree holders and officials. So among other things, moving beyond proxying officials by looking at holders of exam degrees. If you look at a lot of actually papers, especially I think to some extent papers published in quantitative political science and econ. They quite often, because it's easy to get data on exam degree holders, they often treat exam degree holders and officials almost interchangeably. They have these throwaway lines like, every official in the Qing had an exam degree, and which of course not correct. But not every degree holder was appointed, and not every official had an exam degree. So the characteristics of serving officials were different from the characteristics of degree holders. And then in the later chapters, we'll be turning more towards sociology, looking at how family background, networks, and luck helped shape official careers. And so what I'll present sort of a selection of examples, basically from two of the anticipated chapters. One, we have some recent results on the age dynamics of service for officials in the Qing, which, as far as we know, based on our literature search, it just hasn't been possible to really do much on this topic before. Just basic things about how old were people when they started their careers, how old were they when they exited, and so forth. And then more sociological results on family background, where I think I might have presented, can't remember, but we've made a lot of progress on this in the last few years. So first I'll introduce the data. And I think when I was here before, we had only coded a very small number of registers, but now, or editions, I should say, but we've basically been transcribing editions of the Qing, and now we've got about 4.3 million records entered, which pretty much accounts, I mean, as far as we can tell, we've now gotten like every edition that's in an open collection in any library, either in the mainland or overseas. There are still some editions sitting at Beida that somehow they're always somehow not accessible. But anyway, but almost anything else, we've actually transcribed it. And so the Jingshanlu was a roster of civil and, in some editions, military officials. It was published every 3 months during the Qing. Each edition had 13 to 15,000 civil officials. And then if there was a military edition, Zhongshu Beilan, there'd be another 8,000 officials or so. These do not consistently record people that were acting in an acting capacity, like Daili and so forth. And so we're only going to be looking at people with regular positions. And for every official, they have name, province, and county of origin, qualification, and then the location and the title of their position. And then we can work out their bureaucratic rank, the Qingji, by linkage to other sources. And then we can actually estimate income, at least official income, not gray income, obviously. And then from linkage to other data, we can actually, at least for a subset of officials, we can know their exam performance and then their family background. So this other data with family background and exam performance comes from the Junyan Shilu. So these were published by degree holders who earn their degrees in the same sitting of an exam. And they will list for everyone that earned their degree at a particular sitting of a exam, either for the the exam that led to the Jinshi, the Juren, or the Gongsheng. We get the basic information, and then they actually have all the entries have father, patrilineal, grandfather, and great grandfather's attainment, and actually the Junyan Shilu also has a vast amount of other information on other relatives, which we've gone back to code. And so we have, I think, one of the largest samples of sort of family backgrounds for degree holders of that anyone. It's much larger than the Jujuan. No problem. Actually, this is an audience where you can, this slide, I can actually show this and some people will know what this is. So this is just an example of how data get transcribed, where the information on the officials that are it's all listed in columns, and then we have a set of rules for transcription, and then we have I'll show you the team later. So this tri-monthly or quarterly data on officials. That's sort of the core of our studies of late Qing officialdom, where we get positions and qualifications and careers every 3 months. Then we link that to what we call, the Tongnian Shilu data, which has exam performance, family background, and age. We've also been dabbling with linking it to the, we have the UDA that we've turned into a database, the Aixin Juelo Zongbu. And it turns out linking Manchus is a little messy, so we haven't made much progress with that. But in theory, we can, for anyone that was Zongshi Juelo who was an official, we should be able to extract their ancestry information, but that's slow going. We've actually just finished the entire published Luli Dangan that was, there's a published collection of the Luli that were submitted by officials when they met with the emperor. And so we just finished transcribing that a few weeks ago. And so that'll be quite rich. And we're still gathering, we're trying to gather more data on county and prefectural information. I'm going to skip this discussion of linkage, except to say we published on, if you're interested, one of the big challenges with Junyan and I have been talking about is, of course, we have these same people, officials recorded in different editions of the Jinshanlu, and then recorded in other sources. And so the question is, how do you link these people together to collect all of their information in the same place? It turns out that linkage of names of elite males in the 19th century in some ways is pretty easy, because the people would choose given names to kind of showcase their erudition, and or their parents would choose them. And so you don't get too many duplicate names. It's not like, when I visit Scotland or something like that, and there's I sign in somewhere and there's some roster, and at 11 a.m. I'm signing in and I'm already the 5th Campbell of the morning. And then, there's probably 2 Cameron Campbells in the, so, the people that have to do nominative linkage in European places where the names are not very diverse, it's a real challenge. Like, some villages in Scotland would, out of 100 people, probably find 5 Cameron Campbells or something like that. But so the names tend to be unique, and in some way, so you get very few false positives. The big challenge that we have to deal with is actually the either in the original sources, sometimes there were, especially with the Jinshanlu editions, or if you're linking from Jinshanlu to other sources, there could be errors in the recording of the characters for names, that maybe a character in somebody's name would accidentally be replaced by another character that looks similar. Like quite often we see, the surname Wang, replaced by the Sanlian Shui Wang, and things like that. And we have to kind of deal with those problems. Anyway, we have a paper on it. If you're interested, I can talk more later, but I don't have time to go into it. But if you're doing name linkage, we can certainly talk. The other piece of background is that this kind of data that I'm talking about today is really, so we're focused on the where was it, the Jinshanlu and the exam records, and then these are some of the other data sets. I won't go into detail. So last time when James Lee was with me, he introduced some of the kind of Republican era data sets, and that actually has expanded a lot. And our long-term goal is actually to be able to follow families from the Qing, the Republican era, to see look at continuity and so forth. So just a shout out to our team here, either current and former students, faculty, and so forth. I don't know. Yeah, some of you might know Dong Hao. I don't know, Yao, and then Chen Shuang, and a variety of other people. And also another shout out to our coding team. We've all been working with them for like 20 years, actually. We a group of people in Beijing that we've been doing our data entry for us, and it's hard to imagine us being able to do this without their support. So I want to begin the actual, you might say, the content of the talk. First, I want to just to set some context, present some trends in the composition of officials. Just some baseline items, and I think, yeah, if you remember, I might have shown a figure like this in whenever it was 5 or 6 years ago, but we filled in a lot of years since then. So a kind of a few facts about the composition of officialdom, which is that if you just look at all officials, then something like 3/4 of them were, we say, non-banner, which is basically in Chinese minren. They're basically not qiren, right? The opposite of qiren. So most of them would be, maybe by default, might be what we think of as Han Chinese, but possibly could include other people. And then the blue here is actually bannermen. And you can see that bannermen actually really numerically, at least they dominated the central government, the Jingguan, right? And then the outside the central government, the Mingyuan non-banner really dominated the Waiguan, or the officials serving outside of the central government. Then we can also look at the qualifications. So if we look at the non-banner civil officials in the central government, that is Mingyuan, actually, the story is kind of consistent with what people, this kind of claim that officials had exam degrees. So most of the Mingyuan, or the non-banner civil officials in the central government, either had the Qing degree, or they had the Juren degree, and in a few cases they had the earned Gongsheng degree, and then fairly small numbers of people with purchase degrees, although it wasn't zero. But if you go outside the central government, then you find that by the 19th century, actually officials, the sort of Waiguan that were serving in the provinces, the prefectures, and the counties, actually even starting in the middle of the 18th century, and then sort of evolving through the 19th century. So even in the 18th century, there are non-trivial numbers of holders of purchase degrees. And this is sort of the high Qing, right? The reigns of Kanxi and Qianlong and so forth, and Yongzhong. But actually, non-trivial shares of people had purchase degrees, and over time, yeah, the Jiansheng, and then the Yitu Gongsheng, and then over time, the share of these Waiguan officials outside the central government, these purchase degrees, sort of expanded pretty steadily, so that by the late Qing, actually, they were numerically sort of dominant outside the central government. And I'm not going to get too much into purchase degree holders, but I put in a plug for my colleague Lawrence Jiang at HKUST. Has just published a book called Power for a Price, where the whole book is about like degree purchase, office purchase, and so forth during the Qing. And so if you have follow-up questions on holders of purchase degrees, I'll just tell you to read Lawrence's book on, for sort of who are these Jiansheng, and why did people purchase degrees and so forth. In terms of the provincial origins of, it's, well, not really province, but the Jiguan of the officials by time, this is for the top 10 provinces, sort of where officials came from. And what you can see is that there were some long-term trends. Shuntian is kind of special because that was kind of an unusual category where if you were like an official serving in the capital, your sons and some other male relatives could actually sit for the exams in Shuntian prefecture rather than in their home. So Shuntian here is probably not these persons' ancestral, might say, it's not their Zuji, it's rather Jiguan, where they were kind of this up and then down is probably related to changes in rules about who was sitting, could sit for the exam in Shuntian. Then you have the famous, of course, increase in the number of people from Hunan, starting after the Taiping, right? The Xiangjun rising, and then some other changes like declines in Jiangsu and so forth. I think people tend to be interested, especially in the sort of Xiangjun or the, Zhongguofan's coattails. And one thing we can do is simply look at the 1 to 14 officials, Yidao Sipin officials. And indeed, if you're looking at the share coming from Hunan, pretty much as you would expect, it's not exactly, I think it's probably one of the most well-known, if you ask somebody, to tell you something about the Qing, the 19th century during the Qing, they'll talk about the Xiangjun and, the people that rode the Zhongguofan's coattails, but this big increase after the Taiping in in the share of high officials that originally came from Hunan. So on to age dynamics, and one reason I prepared this actually material on age dynamics and so forth is that I was just at a retirement celebration in LA, and so I thought, well, why don't we look at age dynamics and retirement in the and so one of the things we can use this data to study is just basic questions, contextual questions about, say, of the degree of people that earn degrees, the Junyan and the Jingshi, how many ever got appointed? And then for those who were appointed, how long did it take? And was there any evidence at all of a customary or normative age at exit from service that might have corresponded to a kind of typical retirement age? And then if you combine all these sort of dynamics of appointment and exit, what does the actual age distribution of serving officials look like? We don't even actually, there's very few, you might say, large formal organizations before the 20th century where you could actually even do a calculation like this, where you could actually just understand, was there anything like retirement? What are the typical ages at which people were leaving work and so forth? And so I think this is, I can skip this because this is more context for people that are not familiar with the system. So actually, we started looking into this, and there's sort of norms where people, observers at the time, reading this and being 56 and reading this was a little depressing, but so this is from the Book of Rights, so maybe it's out of date, right? So anyway, there were notions, at least historically, of there being an appropriate age beyond which people should no longer serve, and more recently, like there was a historian who wrote during the Qing, Liang Zhangtu, who suggested that careers started when people were 40, people sort of peaked after they turned 50, and then careers should not last more than 30 years, and that retirement should be around age 70, possibly earlier. So at least there was some kind of normative expectations, at least in among commentators. But if you look at the actual rules, there's really nothing in terms of, like, if you look at the Huidian, there's no specification of a maximum age. There's no formal rules that are actually kind of privileging, including age as one of the criteria for assessment. And indeed, it turns out you can find some edicts from emperors that, like the Yongzheng emperor, I guess he got kind of upset because a lot of officials were actually they were lying about their ages, and they were actually underreporting their age because they were worried about age discrimination. So officials would routinely claim to be younger than they actually were, and the Yongzheng emperor was sort of not happy about this, and sort of issued an edict just reminding everyone that the assessment should be based on actual performance, that shouldn't really be thinking about age as a primary criteria. Jiang emperor had something kind of similar. So on the one hand, there's this notion that there was some kind of normative expected age at retirement, but if you actually look at the regulations, there isn't much sign of one. So that's kind of the background. This should have been. So if we start looking at the age dynamics, what we can see is that if we look at the ages at which people earn their degrees, it's kind of sort of what you would expect. And there have been previously studies of the age distribution of exam degree holders, because that was something that was recorded in like the Xiangshilu and Zhujuan and some other sources. So, people earning their Juren, maybe the modal age was in the late 30s, and then quite a long tail for the Juren where people were still earning their Juren degrees actually into their 50s. The Qing, as you would expect, were a little later than the Juren because you had to get the Juren degree before you sat for the Hui Shi and could earn the Qing. And then the Gongsheng had a very wide, a little bit younger in general. Actually, Gongsheng, even though they were numerically a non-trivial portion of the Qing officialdom, they haven't received much of attention at all. They tended to be from poor families. They ended up quite often in undesirable posts and so forth, but they tended to be a little younger. I think one of the really fascinating things we found is that actually, whereas maybe something like about 13% of Juren would go on to earn the Jinshi, so just slightly, maybe about 1/6 or so forth. And then most of those people who earned a Jinshi degree would also get an appointment, the green line here. If you look at the Juren who never succeeded and earned the Jinshi degree, only about 1/3 of them would ever go on to earn to get an appointment. And the process of being appointed, they went into a queue and they just sat there for years waiting for a post. And then again, Lawrence gets into this. So one of the ways you could accelerate, you could try to get appointed earlier by essentially purchasing like power-ups where the government sold, these, you could sort of you can move yourself forward in the queue. But, sort of all these people have worked so hard and yet only 1/3 of them would ever get a post. And then if you combine the people, the Jinshu got posts, maybe about 40% total of the people who got Juren degrees would ever get a job. But again, if they only had a Juren, they could wait for decades before they were appointed. If you were in the Jinshu degree, as you would expect, especially if you did well, you were almost guaranteed a job, and that was sort of mechanical. That there were the rules actually, sorted people, Yijia, Erjia, Sanja, and they were put into different pipelines based on the rating. So when we finally get to at what point, what ages did people actually get appointed? We had this unusual pattern where, because people with a Jinshu degree tended to get, most of them got jobs and they did so fairly quickly. The age at first appointment for Jinshu was actually younger than it was for Juren. So these Juren that never earned the Jinshu degree, they just sat in this pool and waited and waited and waited and waited. And so when they first were appointed, they were often kind of older than, the people would probably be holding higher positions. And then the Gongsheng, again, not a anyway, they were quite spread out. When we turn to age rates, age-specific rates of exit, where we compare, the different kinds of degree holders, and then also we actually can compare the different ranks of the different officials, there's not much sign of some specific age that, if there was a kind of normative retirement age or regulation, we'd see kind of a spike at a specific age, but this actually looks a lot like a, sort of human mortality curve, except it's shifted up. We're doing some estimations right now, and at most maybe 1/3, an actual human mortality curve at this time in the 19th century would probably be kind of down here. So these people aren't like just all dying or something like that. I mean, they may be poor health and things like that. But it's a sort of steady upward trend. And so when we look at age at exit, typically it's in the 50s and 60s. But again, we see actually, especially these if you look at the Jiang, a lot of them are staying actually well into their 70s. There's the numbers are not, proportions are not trivial. People that are actually exiting past age 70. So I don't want anyone to cite this to say that there's no retirement age in historical China, but anyway, then the you also see that sort of low-level officials were actually, they tended to stay later than, the Jin, the highest officials actually mostly were sort of cycled out of service in the early 70s, by the early 70s. And you have these 8 and 9, Baping, Zhouping, Guan are actually many of them still working well into their 70s and apparently into their early 80s, if we believe the ages. So we tie all that together and we just look at the overall age distributions of serving officials. And again, you see a similar pattern where the Qing actually tend to be younger than the Jiren, and then also the Qing, they much less likely to serve past age 70 here, whereas the Jiren and then the Gongsheng are much more likely to be still working after age 70. We can speculate about what's going on here. We've been checking, and it actually, you had to petition to resign. Like you couldn't just like say, I'm going to pursue other things and go back and farm. I mean, you couldn't just quit. You actually have to petition to exit. So, or I think, and you can get sick, or I guess you can die or something like that. But we're still trying. It's an area where we probably have to work with church, more traditional historians to really understand, what could be going, because I think we were sort of surprised to see so many people actually still working actually in their late 60s and 70s. But China would not be unique in this regard. There's really, before the 20th century, there's really very few societies had formal specified retirement ages. And so I think that's it for age. And then I can move on to the study of family background, but basically for age dynamics, the key findings are that there was sort of extraordinarily long wait times for appointment for a Juren who never earned the Qing degree. And then that created these, what to us were unexpected age patterns of first appointment and exit for Juren, where they tended to be a lot older than Juren. No evidence of a normative or customary age of retirement, and which is actually then consistent with the actual regulations and imperial edicts, but not really consistent with the claims that were made by, I provided some examples like Jiang, but there other people wrote similarly that, oh, well, everyone, they would serve until they were 60 or 70 or something. And then we have these sort of lower level officials, and then officials with the less prestigious degrees like the Gongsheng that were staying in office a lot longer. You can speculate about that. They tended to be from more modest origins, so having the post may have been more important to them in terms of their finances than somebody from a wealthy family or somebody who was a high enough official that they could, you might say, put away some savings for their retirement. They might not have much pressure to keep working to a really advanced age. So, and then another kind of sample from our analysis of family background effects. We're going to look at sort of how family background influenced people's chances of being appointed, and then also shape what kind of careers they would have. And there's already a large literature. This is probably one of the biggest, oldest debates in Chinese history, is really starting from Hu Bingyi, and actually goes back even earlier to Kraki, but arguments about whether the exam system really made China, quote, open in terms of making it possible for men from less privileged backgrounds to become officials. And so and most of this work has been focused on, who held exam degrees, because that's where it was easiest to collect data, right? Hibing D did an amazing job back in the early 60s. But actually, not every exam degree holder was appointed. Many officials who were appointed only had short, unremarkable careers. And so there could be selection processes operating at both these stages. And then family background, which we can actually study with the Jiang data, may have had different effects on appointment, promotion, and termination than on the attainment of exam degrees. And so we can actually look at all of this. So what we can actually do is we look at a kind of a, you might say, our primary outcome measure for, you might say, career success. We estimate officials' total official income over the course of their career by taking their bureaucratic ranks, and then, every 3 months, and then getting at least the statutory, compensation that an official of that rank is supposed to receive. I mean, it's messy, but at least we can add that up for their entire career, and then as a sort of an estimate of kind of their overall official income over the course of their career. Then we also look at actual appointment as an official. Now, so we can compare the influence of family background, both for the career outcomes of the Juren who never went on to get the Jing and for the Jing. And then we have a very large sample here that we can work with. So as a refresher, kind of this is a small part of the examination system where I'm leaving off, to the left is all the earlier stages, like getting the Junyan and so forth. But, so we're going to be looking at the, we don't have rosters of the people who sat for the provincial exams, the Xiang, right? We just have the passers. So, we can look at the age at which people passed the provincial exam and the determinants, and then earn the provincial degree, but only for degree passers. And then what we can do, we can look at from the people who got the provincial degree, how many went on to earn the Jing degree. And we can also look for these Juren at the people that actually got appointed. And then, once people have the Jing, we can actually follow them to appointment. But the main point is that once you had the Jing, there were actually rules that sort of governed almost in a mechanical fashion how you would be kind of allocated based on your performance. So when we look at Juren, and you want to look at how family background shaped them, their performance and so forth. One of the key things we look at first is the age at which people earned the Juren degree, because that turned out to be very sensitive to family background. And then we, I'm not going to get into all the methodological details, but then we take the predicted age of earning the Juren as kind of a summary measure for family background, where you're combining all of the information we have about family background and representing it as the predicted age of earning the Juren degree, where essentially a lower predicted age of earning the Juren is actually kind of a sign of a very favorable background. And so then we use that as our kind of summary measure of family background when we examine exam performance, whether or not people are ever appointed, and then their total income as a Juren. And so I won't get into this. So if we look at when people earn the Juren degree, and then how kind of the detailed measures of family background affected it, everything we see is that essentially family privilege was associated with passing or earning the Juren degree earlier, right? So, and it makes sense. Wealthier families could hire tutors and so forth. Or and so we, if you have a Juren in the last 3 generations, or Jingshi in the last 3 generations, or even a purchase degree in the last 3 generations, you're going to, on average, have the Juren degree at a younger age than other people. Also, your father's highest rank was also associated with a much earlier age at passing. And again, that makes sense that if your father was a high official, there'd probably be all sorts of people offering to tutor his sons, right? Because it was a way of forming a connection with somebody important. If your father was actually serving at the time you sat for the exam and then earned the degree, you were about 2.3 years younger on average when you earned the degree. If you already had a purchase degree at the time you sat for the Jiang, you're also going to be younger than your counterparts. So everything we have suggests that kind of family and privileged family background is associated with kind of passing the degree earlier. So again, we take the predicted age at passing and we just treat that as our kind of synthetic or composite measure of family background rather than having all of these other things stuffed into the equation. So if we look at, okay, essentially, what are the determinants of the various kinds of outcomes for holders of the Jiang degree? We, on the one hand, we have our measure of family background, this predicted age at Jiang. And remember that a lower predicted age is sort of, you might say, a better thing, right? That a lower predicted age means you, well, I don't know if it's better. Well, it means that you come from a more privileged background. So essentially, if so here what you're seeing is the effect of reducing the predicted age. So you sort of should flip the signs if you're thinking about essentially what the effect of family background is, so that actually better family background means that you probably do better in terms of your ranking on the HKUST exam, increases your chances, conditional on your performance, of being appointed. It increases your total lifetime income if you're appointed solely with a Jiang degree. And it also increases your chances of going on to earn a Qing degree. So pretty unambiguously, and these two, again, are net of your exam, your performance on the HKUST. So, this is after controlling for, quote, ability as reflected in the performance on the HKUST. Also, if you, interestingly, if you do have a purchase degree of your own, you actually are going to do worse. Your ranking on the HKUST is actually going to be lower. So I think we could say things about like legacy admissions and things like that here. But anyway, actually, you'll have a slightly lower total income, and actually, you're less likely to proceed to the Qing degree. So some interesting dynamics there. And then, the actual, so we look at the actual age of earning the Jiang degree as opposed to the predicted. And again, so, younger, we tend to think of as being, a sign of talent. So if you're younger when you pass and earn the degree, you're more likely to be appointed as a Jiang. You're going to have higher lifetime income, and you're more likely to go on to the Qing degree. And so, so basically, family background matters a lot on all of the outcomes for Jiang, even actually controlling for ability, if you want to call it that, as reflected in exam performance. Then if we go to sort of the Qing, like we then look at, okay, what for the people that actually pass the Qing, essentially, what happens, what shapes their performance in terms of whether they're assigned to Yijia, Erjia, or Sanjia, the first, second, or third tier of passers. And then we use an ordinal logit. Here, it's important to remember that your tier from among the Qing was not determined by, you had that first stage of the Hui Shi, which was the written exam, but then you had the Dian Shi, which was actually much more subjective, which that would determine whether you were sort of the Yijia, Erjia, or Sanjia in your ranking in between. So there's actually a subjective component to the assessment here. But again, basically, what you see here is that essentially family background. If you have, Gongsheng in the previous generations, Jinshi in the previous generations, you're more likely to be in a more favorable exam tier. So we've already kind of flipped the signs here. So also Shengyuan doesn't matter for much. But also if your father was an official, there's a big boost if he was a sort of Yiping Da Wuping official in your own chances of being in sort of Yijia, Erjia, etc. And then also if you were younger, you actually did better as well. So no, I'm sorry. Yeah, because older. So if you were older, you were less likely to do well. And that would include, it's not because people were deteriorating, it's a selection effect where the main reason people would be older when they finally passed was they'd already tried and failed, right? You could try 3 times. So somebody's unusually old when they finally pass the Jing Shi, they probably failed twice before. So it's just that you're looking at a pool of people that have already failed a few times. So then we actually look then at, for here we use as a measure of family background, we look at kind of the linear prediction from the ordinal logit of the exam tier. And basically what we see is that family background actually had a big effect on your chances of appointment, again, controlling for your performance on the exam. And it also had a pretty big effect, positive effect on your total lifetime income. So you either served longer or you earn more, you were higher ranked or both, right? We're just combining those two together. If you were older, when you passed the Qing, you didn't do as well. And then in performance, of course, on the exam matters in the expected way. So what we can do, that was all these sort of regressions showing that there were these associations, and then we can look directly at the data. And when we tabulate officials, we compute for all officials their kind of total estimated official salary, sort of adding up. And then we divide these officials into quartiles. And then we look at the distributions of the family backgrounds of the officials in these quartiles. What you see is that essentially as you move from the lowest quartile of total, you might say, official income over the course of the career up to the highest quartile, there is a pretty noticeable increase in the share of officials with sort of favorable backgrounds. So if you look at, say, just whether or not somebody has a Qing Shi in the last 3 generations, for the lowest quartile of officials in terms of total income, about 7.6% of them have a Qing Shi in the last 3 generations versus 14.6% for the officials in the highest quartile. Then as you work down, you're sort of saying, okay, what if it's a Qing Shi or a Juren? Or what if it's a Qing Shi, Juren, or Gongsheng, et cetera? As these accumulate, for example, if you look at sort of, you could go all the way down here to maybe the you're casting a very wide net, so that here we're looking at anyone who has a Shengyuan or above in the last 3 generations. About 60% of the first quartile officials had, somebody with some kind of status in the last 3 generations. But if you look at the highest quartile, it's 75%. So you're looking at, at the various highest sort of, you might say, the either the officials with the longest careers or the most income or both. You're talking about essentially especially, you're talking about a group that has moved up, being increasingly concentrated in terms of being from more favored or favorable family backgrounds. So basically family background is clearly continues to matter, even after, Hubingdi and others have studied family background influences on actually obtaining the degree and so forth. But it's pretty obvious that there's then continued effects of family background on, sort of appointment and then conditional on appointment, your overall career. So I think this gets into some of the more sociological interpretation. but I guess that, my takeaway from this is that I find this hard to reconcile with the idea for these kinds of findings, at least for the 19th century. It's sort of hard to reconcile with the kind of the idealized picture of the exam system that's presented to us, that it was a kind of this pipeline by which people from, or men from less privileged backgrounds could reach the heights of officialdom. I mean, there were examples, just like in the United States. I don't, the whole Horatio Alger's. I mean, there were really, the occasional person, from nowhere that, got rich. But overall, it looks like, Qing officialdom was, especially as it got higher and higher, was dominated by people from relatively favorable backgrounds. And so I think that's the main takeaway from this. So in terms of future directions, I think where we want to go, and this comes out in a lot of conversations with Lawrence Jiang, my colleague at HKUST, is that we have to, I think, move beyond kind of this discussion of kind of whether or not the system was meritocratic, because it's clear that family background had a huge effect. And, it's probably worthwhile thinking about what we really mean when we say meritocratic. It may be that these people from these privileged backgrounds at some levels may have been more effective officials because they had grown up in an environment where they understood the use of power and how management of relationships. So it's whether they were actually worse, as they may have very well been more effective officials, and that may be why they were successful. But so the exam may have been, you might say, objective in the sense of being fair, but if you think about meritocracy as sort of recruiting the people that are actually going to do the job the best, maybe it's not a bad thing that family background mattered. That's maybe potentially controversial, but anyway, this is one of Lawrence's points. But I think the main issue is that as much as the sort of exam system has been reified as being this kind of meritocratic ideal, with my problem with this has always been that, I mean, it was fair, it was objective, but who's to say whether the people that were doing the best on the written exams were really the best administrators? They did well. I just showed you that in terms of career-wise, they did well, but that was kind of baked into the system based on the kind of the promotion system. And I guess my thought on this has always been that if we're all academics, and if we if sort of skills, academic skills and writing ability and so forth, and mastery of classical knowledge were really sort of signs that people could be good administrators, or universities would all be a lot better run than they actually are. But that there could have been skills actually that were important to success as an administrator that may have been acquired as cultural capital. So I think the other point I want to conclude with is that now we've actually publicly released samples. I checked, and this QR code is working, where you can actually download two different. We've released the 1850 to 1864, and then the 1900 to 1912 raw data that you can. Seems to be people downloading it, so I certainly I encourage you or your students to download it and take a look. And then we've also begun putting up some kind of explanations and documentation about how we process the data to prepare it for analysis. So I hope if you don't like what I've been saying, download the data and publish a paper with it and cite us. So, but I think that's it. Oh, and then I think next year we're going to actually release all of the 18th century Qing data. Will go up to probably 1800. So I think thanks very much for coming, and look forward to hearing your questions.
Yeah, thanks, Campbell, for this very interesting talk. I actually, before opening it up, I actually want to use my host as
Yeah,
my
go ahead.
privilege as host to sort of ask you two questions.